Hi, everyone. Another year where we have holidays in which we are distant from one another. This drasha is the message for Chag HaPesach for our community, but I do want to give a plug. We're trying to be creative as more and more people get vaccinated to see how we can come together safely. So with masks and social distancing, there will be a Shabbos Hagadol Drasha in accordance with the opinion of the Aruch HaShulchan, the different opinions this year when to do it. This coming Shabbos after the 2:00 Mincha. So everybody's invited. We would like to see who's coming. So there's a registration link in your email. But this, what I'm going to share now, is in lieu of a formal drasha on Sunday and Monday, the first and second day of Pesach. And many people, of course, are still stuck at home, and it's difficult. So we want to make sure that we can give them, that we can be together at least virtually with another edition of this YouTube drasha, this holiday series. No matter who one is with, Pesach will be had, Pesach will be experienced, it will be celebrated. We want to focus our learning together on the concept of slavery, of avdus. After all, what is Pesach? We are not acknowledging our freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from oppressive servitude. So all of Pesach can be summarized by explaining what slavery is so that we understand what it is not and what we are meant to do with the unshackling that took place. Rabbi Soloveitchik, and much of what I'm going to say comes from the Rav, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, and he explains there are two aspects of slavery, two kinds of slavery. The slavery of an individual as if they are an inanimate object. Slavery of a person as if they're not a person, the way you and I understand. That's the reality. There's that kind of slavery, and then there's another aspect of slavery, which is different, but obviously connected, and it goes hand in hand. It's just as important, and what we are going to try to define is this other aspect of slavery as well. The thought and personality of a slave is complete submission. One's psyche is subdued. One's way of thinking is altered. And the very way in which they conceptualize the world around them is limited, restrictive. This is all seen by the fact that the freedom is really from both of these. The most obvious one being the physical freedom, but the other one being, of course, as well, the psychological freedom, the mental development. And so when you look in the Haggadah, you get to the second cup of wine. Before we say, Baruch atah Hashem Goal Yisrael, we talk about the redemption, we bless God accordingly. What are the words immediately before that? At the end of this, the bracha for the second cup, Al Gulasenu v'al Pedus Nafshenu, on our redemption and Pedus Nafshenu. What is Pedus Nafshenu? So this is why there are two terms, Geula, redemption, and Pedus Nafshenu. It's a redemption not of the body, so to speak, not of the physical, but of the nefesh. It's something else altogether. The Rambam, Maimonides, tells us, when we fulfill the mitzvah of the night, the most important mitzvah, the mitzvah of telling children about Yetzias Mitzrayim, about our Exodus experience, what does the Rambam say? Maimonides tells us that we say, Hado Sano Kodesh Baruch Hu, that Hashem collected us. V'yotzienu lecherus. and he brought us out to freedom. Why is there both this Pedus again and Yotzienu that Hashem brought us out? Two different terms? Because it talks about one, the slave as this inanimate object now being made animate once again, so to speak, and slave being one who is able to view the world with a renewed sense of hope, which we will try to go ahead and analyze. So the one that's least obvious is the one that makes sense for us to analyze, this Pedus Nafshenu. So greatness, Soloveitchik says, greatness of man is demonstrated, it's expressed when there is dignity and creativity. The dignity and creativity of free will. When you're a slave, you don't have that free will. You can't showcase your greatness unless you have freedom. And so Pesach is about being able to actualize and to tap into that greatness that we have by breaking free from whatever is holding us back. And a slave has delusions. They're not able to see reality. They are being withheld. And they see what they would like to see. Of course, you and I might have that image of someone who's trapped, and someone who thirsts, and somebody who has this mirage in front of them. One who is trapped is forced by desperation, in a sense they can't be in touch with reality. They end up seeing what they want to see. And the great example, an incredible example, the Ibn Ezra, one of our top commentators, he tells us, he says, I don't understand. You have the splitting of the sea. There's 600,000 men, 3 million total people. Ibn Ezra says, we understand. We know that there were only 600 chariots there. We had overwhelming odds. We had an overwhelming majority. What is going on? He explains, and he says, it's that mentality. They're trapped. They're enslaved. They can't break out of it. The progression of the Seder is that we're able to see and understand what they were able to break out of. Soloveitchik, he was around during World War II, during the Holocaust. And he says survivors came from the camps and they explained their experience as best as they could. But it's hard to understand in the Shoah that those in the camp were tortured and demeaned so much that they were even afraid, stricken with fear at the sight of a child, at the sight of a sudden person that wasn't necessarily a threat, because they were trained to think in a certain way due to that level of subjugation. And a slave indeed is constantly in fear, even when it's not justified. And when we go through the Seder night, we realize just to be free in terms of physically free, that's not it. It's allowing our mind to reach the loftiest levels and to make sure that we actualize the potential that was taken away from us. When we look in Devarim, and Moshe relays to the Jewish people the Tochacha, the warning about what could befall them. Sure enough, there were additional examples for us, for you and I, maybe Nazi Germany, Siberia, communist Russia. We'll talk about that. But it explains what could happen to us if we falter, and of course we did falter. It explains there with great foresight, foreshadowing what would become of us. There in Devarim, it's explained we'll have trembling hearts and failing eyes and despair. What is being described here? Being described that our heart, our mind will not be able to be fully human until we have this freedom that we will see and be deluded, that which doesn't really exist based on the trauma that was caused to us. And so beautifully put, beautifully understand, why is it that we have to recline? And if we don't recline when we drink the 4 cups, so we have to drink again. Why is it? Because when you recline, what happens? You're showing, to an extent, disrespect. We're going to the opposite extreme. We were stricken. We were shackled. We had to be obedient and upright at the behest of all of the Egyptian taskmasters. Now we recline. An individual who reclines is relaxed. It's intentional. We need to remind ourselves and train ourselves that relaxation and freedom go together, and making that our mindset tonight, that nothing is holding us back. And that's why Haseba is a requirement, not just a custom, but a law. And perhaps even more than that is that there's an exception to this rule. And what's the exception? If a student is at the Seder table of his Rabbi, his master, he doesn't recline. That's the exception. Why? Because he's in front of his master. He's in front of his teacher. He's in front of his life guide. How he can't recline? He's absolved. He's exempt from reclining. Meaning that what? The rest of us, we don't have an excuse. We have to demonstrate this. It's critical that we demonstrate it. And that's the importance of Haseba and breaking out that which was holding us back for so many years. The slave is not in control of his or her own time. We're trying to understand what a slave is so that we understand what we were able to become. And a slave is not in control of his own time. And the first mitzvah, the first commandment was Rosh Chodesh, was being able to sanctify the Newman. That's about time. That was intentional. What do we need as a mitzvah, as a connection point to the Almighty, in order to make sure that we realize we're now in control of our time? So that was our first mitzvah. As the Rav says, we need to make sure that we live time. We live time rather than live in time. Not imprisoned by time, not in this bubble called time, that we live time proactively. And part of that is what took place in Mitzrayim is not yesterday's news, it's now. When we study about Rabbi Akiva, when we study about Rashi, these aren't people that are part of our past, they're people that are part of our present. Our freedom is to be able to control time. What do you mean? 2,000 years have gone by, 3,000 years have gone by. No, we control time. That's what was given to us on this night of Leil HaSeder. And therefore, this intergenerational conversation, this interconnectedness with generations past, that's part of what it means to have the mentality of freedom. We're not beholden by time and space. Paro, you tried to trap us. We know how to transcend. And that is why we're able to fundamentally look at time, even though there might be just 1 minute apart. You know, the minute before candlelighting, we could create what we ever wanted to create. 1 minute after candlelighting, the prohibition of labor, the same action, fundamentally changed by Shabbos candlelighting. And therefore, time, what's the difference? The only difference is time. And we can dictate time, and action is categorically different after candlelighting than it was beforehand. Another aspect of slavery with regards to time, and it's so fascinating. You and I, we say halach ma'anya, which we'll analyze. Halach ma'anya in the Rambam, starts it differently. He says, before you get to halach ma'anya, talking about this bread of affliction, you need to add 3 words. The paragraph starts with these 3 words. V'hilu yatzanu mimitzrayim. With haste, we exited the land of Egypt. What is haste? What does it mean that we hurried? Why do we need to say that? Because we finally were able to have cognition, to understand, to comprehend a concept of time. Hurry? Why would I hurry? I'm told where to go if I'm a slave. That's why the Rambam says, before we say halach ma'anya, we say behilu yatzanu mitzrayim, with haste. We exited Mitzrayim because haste wasn't relevant to us before. Now it is relevant to us. And we'll see how that fits the paragraph so beautifully. Because what is afterwards? Halach ma'anya, it's about the same theme of understanding what a slave was. So now we can understand what we aren't any longer. Halach ma'anya is about the ability to have solidarity. A slave, besides time, he also needs to think about himself. He's so self-focused, self-centered. He isn't able to think about others. Halach ma'anya. We want to share our bread with others. We want to say, come in, join us. We're going to break bread with you. What are we saying? Halach ma'anya, a paragraph of inviting people in off the street. You think they didn't make Seder plans already? Maybe we should have called them the week before, a few days prior. Why are we saying it now? What's the message? The message is that tonight we're free. Tonight we can have a concept of solidarity. We can break out of being just determined to make sure we get our next meal and make it to the next hour, to the next moment. We can have solidarity with others. That's the importance and the role of halach ma'anya. Tonight, this night of Pesach, we are B'nai Chorin. We are people who are defined by the radical freedom that we have. And it's not a coincidence that tonight is so full of passages of Torah study, because the other comparison besides Jews on the night of Pesach Seder to B'nai Chorin are people who study Torah. The Torah allows your mind to break free, to break free of everything that's holding us back mentally and intellectually. One great example of this is what happened to Moshe Rabbeinu. When was Moshe Rabbeinu's mind blown? When was he able to really consider that there was something else beyond what was on the surface? He was there at the sneh, and he sees the bush burning, and he sees there's a fire in the middle of the bush, and the outside of the bush is not being consumed by this fire. And Moshe is perplexed, but there was a message there. We're told that the message to Moshe was, Moshe, you have doubts as to whether or not these Jewish people are worthy of having all these miracles, bringing their freedom. Moshe, do not be afraid. Moshe, do not have doubts. While it seems like on the outside, these are just another group of slaves, these Jewish slaves, they have a coldness to them. They aren't able to connect to others. They have a burning fire inside. They have a passion inside. And you can see that passion if you look closely enough. This bush, internally, there's great combustion, and they are not seeking to just follow Paro. They're actually seeking freedom. They're seeking the ability to be Hashem's people. You can't see it now, but look more closely, and you'll see this burning bush. The fire inside represents the Jewish individual. These slaves, these Jewish slaves are different, Moshe. Take a chance on them, Moshe. It's not what you think. Don't just look at the outside. Don't just look at the exterior. Look at the inside, and you will find a Jew. No matter what a Jew is serving, no matter who a Jew is serving, no matter what ideals a Jew might be serving. A Jew is always questing for freedom. A Jew is always striving for freedom, to break out, to be a Ben Chorin, to serve the Almighty so that he or she is not serving anything else, anybody else. That's the night of the Seder. Why do we say, Avadim hayinu leparo b'Mitzrayim? We know who. We know that we were slaves to Paro. Why is it telling us that? We know that Paro was in Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim seems to be an extra description. We know who it is. So perhaps we could say that in Egypt, they were slaves to Paro, but only in Egypt. Once they got out of Egypt, they were able to tap into their potential. Yes, they were serving and they were held back, but once they crossed that border, they were able to serve a higher calling, better perspective of freedom. And Paro is not a name. Paro doesn't mean anything. Paro is the name of position. It was a cold kind of relationship. There are different kinds of slavery. There's slavery of the state. There's slavery to an individual. America had horrible time. Slaves, families had slaves. In communist countries, they had slaves that served the state. You served kind of upper echelon of individuals that you never met, you didn't know. That was the kind of slavery that we had in Mitzrayim. Paro, they didn't know Paro. There were these state serfs, these state-owned inanimate objects, these pieces of property. Those were our ancestors. An impersonal relationship, as this was, is particularly a cruel kind of relationship. And so when we think back about what slavery is so that we can appreciate what we are now not, we can see that the time was something which we needed in order to facilitate this burning desire that we had to serve the Almighty, to be free of the other kind of servitude that had defined us for so many hundreds of years. That we understand that our freedom was not just physical. Now we can understand that our freedom was pedus nafshenu. It makes it into our liturgy. And we understand what we had to break away from in order to become something great. I want to share with you this quote from Rabbi Soloveitchik. On the first night of Pesach, we tell the story of a long search by man for God, of God responding to the inquisitive search, of God taking man who longs for him into his embrace. At the Seder, we try to stimulate the naive curiosity of the children and thereby make them God searchers. The quest for God, along with the acceptance of the commandments, is the true spiritual liberation when we are told to share and pass on the story to the next generation. We think of what the Rambam has told us. It needs to be both. It needs to be talking about Hado Sano, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu redeemed us, and he took us out. Taking us out, yes, we're no longer there, we're on the other side of the border, but also Hado Sano HaKadosh Baruch Hu personally, intimately, the Almighty took us and allowed us to achieve that which we had within us, to be able to become a people radical, to be able to become a people of a book, to be able to become a people of concepts, to be able to become a people that served the Almighty. And at that time, this incredible idea, an Almighty that can't be measured, that can't be seen, that can't be heard, and to have that trust, to have that faith. And on this night of Pesach, we break away from all of the shackles that might be holding us back. And we ask ourselves, how can we have progress individually, collectively? How can we achieve this unbelievable freedom that we speak about? that we created with the precedent that happened so many thousands of years ago. We realize that time cannot bind us. We realize we have the ability to have solidarity now, and to think of others. We realize that the Torah is what allows us to be more broad, and it is the fuel that allows us to overcome barriers. That's B'nai Chorin. That's the idea of Cherus. That's the idea of freedom. So never again will we be afraid when it's not justified to be afraid. Never again, if we are able to maintain the faith of the night of Pesach, will we have these trembling hearts, these eyes that fail us. Never again will we be told to stand up straight in front of another human being and to bow before them, to do whatever they tell us to do. We'll be able to recline, we'll be able to relax, we'll be able to tap into who we are, so that we have the freedom to take our mind, to take our hearts, take our souls, and dedicate it to the Almighty for this ultimate freedom that is irreplaceable. Here at Somni, at Hashem's will, that we're able to understand the dual nature of slavery so that we can understand the dual nature of freedom. And that with this dual nature of freedom, thankfully we have our physical freedom mostly, and now we need to do the hard part. And that is to tap into this power of Pesach, to activate our minds, to activate our souls, so that we can reach the potential that we know that we have within us, as inspired by our ancestors so many years ago, for us as individuals, for us as a community, for all of Klal Yisrael. Thank you.